Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the end of Planar Crossroads. And we welcome all of our travelers from across the stars because we're going to do an Around the Hearth again. The first one we didn't really pan out, but this one is going to be about our thoughts on the new Starfinder system from Paizo. And I actually picked up the book. Everyone else is using the Starfinder SRD, which is really easy to find. All you have to do is type in www.starfindersrd.com, and then there you go. So I'm glad that it's that convenient. I'm sure that Paizo will have their official one out soon. This is the fan one. But Paizo is really good, has been really good in the past about keeping Pathfinder fairly open to new players getting in, and then mainly just keeping the setting styled stuff off the main part of their official one. So I think they'll do the same thing with this, but we'll see. Let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to try and take it through the book a little bit, and we're going to start with our thoughts on, well, let's start first with our thoughts on the aesthetics that they've got going on thus far before we jump actually into the book. I am someone who is influenced by the aesthetics of certain systems and what those aesthetics lean towards. So I'll probably give my opinions first on this one because I like the aesthetics quite a bit. Especially an aesthetic choice they made with one particular race, which I'll actually talk about in the race section. But it looks like Pathfinder, but in the stars, so that's good. They didn't change that up a whole bunch. I'm looking forward to some Wayne Reynolds art in here occasionally because I really like his art, and he does a lot of art for them. But I think it does give a good feel. It's not too bright and too clean. It feels like it's got that aesthetically that look of a setting or a game that's, yeah, the tech's high, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's utopian type of setup. So those are my impressions. Does anybody else have any we'll start on my little thing here that I've got. Colin, do you have any opinions on the aesthetics that they've got going on?
I haven't picked up the book itself, but I did at one point have a copy of the First Encounter booklet that I got. And I tend to agree with you. It's very, it looks like Pathfinder, but it's a little bit darker looking, little more dystopian. Like on the front cover of that First Contact booklet, you see like, it's sort of in the background, but there's this dead goblin that his eyes cracked open. He's just sort of laying there dead, and it's really, really, really spooky. It's definitely got some spookiness to it, some space spook.
Yeah, I could see a xenomorph in certain situations of this aesthetic. So yeah, I get where you're going. What about you, Greg?
In all honesty, and I'm just trying to remember the name of the show off the top of my head. On Netflix, and I'm having a problem with it. God damn it! Why am I having such a problem? Anyways, the aesthetic really reminds me of the ships and the creatures that are in. Sorry, I'm actually pulling up Netflix right now because I'm pissed off that I can't remember this damn thing. It's got this starship, the Raza. It's basically people forget their background stories and everything like that, and it very much to me has this sort of feel of the conglomerates versus these pirates versus independents versus, and the aesthetics in and of itself lend well to that sort of unknown or what have you. It's very interesting in that regard. Again, in the races, looking at some of the races back and forth, and the aesthetics that they've chosen for those are quite interesting based upon the artwork, or at least the design of them. It's quite interesting.
Okay.
On a quick side note, sorry to interrupt, but I was looking at some of the writing on some of the technological dashboards that they have going on. It's very reminiscent of some of the magical runes that you see in Pathfinder.
Which is a nice thing to point out. It could very well be a modified or modern styled draconic or something going on there.
That's what I'm thinking.
So that is cool.
Yeah, and I found it. It's called Dark Matter.
Dark Matter. Inspirations for your Starfinder campaigns. All right. What about you, Alex? Do you have any opinions on the aesthetic of this particular one?
I can't say much about the artwork and such. I haven't seen that much, but it looks nice. Not too dark, but not too bright either. I can say that the aesthetics in the books, though, reminds me a lot of the Mutants and Masterminds. It's very much this superhero blue all throughout the book, and these blue boxes everywhere.
Yep, I could see that. All right, so that's our opinions on the aesthetics. Like I said, I've got a few more opinions on a race when we get to it. But first, let's take it as the book does, and we'll hit character creation, because we don't need to do an overview. I think we're going to do a non-overview with this. So with character creation, you're going to choose the normal stuff like races and classes, but they add something in, probably a cue they took not just from 5th, but something they had started to implement in certain ways with traits in Pathfinder itself, and that is themes. And I like it. I think that 5th took that cue from them, from Pathfinder, when they started implementing traits in their expounded rule sets. And everybody knows that I like to have traits in my game when we're using monoclassed games, because it adds in that extra bit of flavor. They're like maybe a fourth or a half of a feat in value, so they don't over or underbalance the game. I think that themes are actually going to they do play a much bigger part in this one. So, Colin, what are your opinions on the character not just the character creation and the themes, but your overall impressions of how they're working the mechanics of individual PCs, individual player characters?
You know, the themes are one thing that stood out to me, and one thing I noticed was there's a theme called Themeless. I was trying to look that up right here on the SRD, but it's sort of like a weak version of other themes for when you feel like the character doesn't necessarily fit into one of them all that well, which to me makes me think that in the future there's going to be a lot of third-party themes out there that sort of fill that gap. But I feel like right now maybe there's not enough themes. I kind of like the traits better because there's a large variety of them, and even drawbacks on top of that if you wanted to add more variety. I don't know how I feel about the themes. I think right now my favorite theme is the themeless theme, even though it's not mechanically the best.
Okay. I do think that that's something that will definitely change in the future, because Pathfinder has always had a leg up in its ability to compete with things like 4th or 5th, because of it. You just had so much customizability. And right now, they're ahead of the game on as far as Dungeons and Dragons, because Dungeons and Dragons hasn't come out with a Spelljammer thing yet.
Yeah.
And this is not necessarily Paizo's answer, in my opinion, to Spelljammer, but it is a way for them to get into that science fantasy realm. So I think that's probably a thing. But yeah. So what about your opinions on, as far as they're handling the way they're handling the character stats and different things like that?
I thought it was interesting that they split up hit points and stamina points into two closely related systems, where it's sort of like I like the idea behind it, because the stamina points is sort of like how many hits you can take before actually taking long-lasting damage. So it's not necessarily damage reduction, but it's a different pool of points that gets drained before you actually hit your hit points, to my understanding, unless it's something very critical. Actually reminds me of the different kinds of wounds you can get in World of Darkness settings.
Okay. I can see that comparison. How about you, Greg? What are your feelings with the traits, and also how they're just working the different stats that you're going to need to manage when you are making a character?
Well, the one thing I've actually noticed is it does kind of feel like they're taking a cue from Fifth, the way that they did their direction. As you guys know, I'm more familiar, or at least was more familiar with 5th edition before coming into the Pathfinder games. But I do see a lot of similarity in that, in terms of, especially one of the things that I was noticing is one of the alternatives to rolling for stats or even point buy is the way that they're doing their quick picks that they've got set up there. So you can do either focus, split, versatile, and that's a really interesting way to do stats for different types of characters. The one thing I really like, the themes, as I say, they feel more fleshed out than, say, the backgrounds in 5th edition, for instance, where, yeah, the backgrounds will get you a couple skills that you get proficiencies in, but they don't feel like actual paths you can follow, versus, my guy's just looking for perception, so he's going to be a sailor. It doesn't really affect too much of the story unless you've got the actual story-driven side of things.
Right. So you're saying that the backgrounds in 5th felt just like that. They felt like where you were, and the themes feel like where you're going.
Yeah, basically. And I think that's actually a really smart idea, is you can play with that a little bit more.
Right. I mean, because you can, and it offers a lot of variety, a lot more variety than just saying, oh, I'm a fighter sailor, or I'm a fighter acolyte. Well, now I'm a fighter ace pilot, or I'm a fighter even, Xenoseeker, or whatever. And those do change the way you behave mechanically in the game.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I did like that as well. That is one of the things I did like about them.
That gradual progression. What about you, Alex? Any opinions on the new shifts? Because you've got a lot more Pathfinder under your belt than probably even I do. So what's your feelings or opinions on the way they've tinkered with what they're doing with the character creation?
I think that you have to make it fair and compare it to the core rulebook, because this is what it is. And if you look at the core rulebook, you have the races and the classes. There are no traits. There are no themes. There's really just the races and the classes. And within these classes, some are more versatile than others. For example, the sorcerer, you can pick your bloodline. But if you play a fighter, you're pretty much just a fighter. There are no archetypes yet. And that's the same with Starfinder. You have your classes, but you also have these themes that kind of fiddles a little bit with your character, at least more than what you would have in the core Pathfinder. I haven't read the creation rules that much, but it seems like the whole stamina and resolve points and everything, there's a lot more to combat than just taking damage and healing damage with potions or healing spells or whatever. So I can imagine that there are ways to lose a battle while still having full health in this system.
Right.
Which makes it a lot interesting.
Right. And I would agree. I say that I'm sure there's going to be spells or abilities or things like that come out that say you target a character's hit points, like actual hit points with this attack versus their stamina. Or this, if a character has no more stamina left and they're hit with this, regardless of their hit points, they fall unconscious or something like that. Or things that make it a lot more interesting when you're fighting something, because, and that's something that some older RPGs will fall into, simply because the way we game has changed. We had hit points. That's what you had. You had that forever in games. That's what it was. You attacked their hit points. And then games started to do things like stamina points. But tabletops didn't start doing that until, or at least Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder styled tabletops didn't really start doing that. I'm unfamiliar with how GURPS did theirs, but I think there was a stamina mechanic in GURPS, if I remember right. But regardless, there's that idea that you can win a battle more than one way. And there's even more than just the, oh, I'm going to bash it in, or I'm going to diplomatize it out. There's also that I'm going to wear them down, or I'm going to do other things to get around this battle. I think it opens a lot up. So I like that character stuff quite a bit. One remark I would like to say, which is a criticism, is they specifically, when they're talking about creating your character and stuff, they say making flawed characters as far as their statistics. They're like, sure, you can dump out your whatever score to below 10 if you want to, without racial modifiers, of course. You can make it go lower if you want to, but you're not going to get any points for it. So this idea that I didn't like that, really, because I like to have a character that's, got an 8 in something without having to worry about the racial stuff. Because in Pathfinder, if you're doing point buy, your racial stats, unless they're -4s, don't really have a huge impact on the type of class you get to pick. You can really, if you want to play a rat folk that does do a lot of fighting, like physical fighting, you can do that, because you can take those points that it was going to get, make those 10s instead by dumping them down, and then putting your strength up, or something along those lines. And I liked that. You can't do that in Starfinder. So
Right.
there is that.
So they're taking the option of min-maxing away from you, which is unfair, I'd say. You should have that option. Not everyone like
I
it,
think so.
and it's not perhaps appropriate at every table, but the option should be there.
It almost feels like
I
they're
would-
trying to get back to doing the 46 drop the lowest as the standard stat bonus, or like the way that you do your stats versus point buy versus array, just from the standpoint of there's no real disadvantage to doing it now to a certain extent.
Right. And I think that this is going to play a lot into the pre-generated material that they give, because they're probably going to come in and use those focused, or whatever, what were they called? Focused do, 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 do. There you go. Focused, split, and versatile. I think they're going to use those when they're making their NPCs and their baddies. I think they're going to use those as their splits, because even if you're not rolling, then that's going to be basically how you're going to split your stats. It's going to fall into one of those categories depending on how you want to play. That's just how it is, because you only got so many stats. And that is something that I wasn't all that fond of. So Paizo, I don't like that part, because I do like to make my characters with an 8 in something that I want them to have an 8 in. If I wanted to make a Vesk who had terrible strength, but had a lot of other stuff, I want to do that. A scrawny Vesk, I want to do that. But you don't really have that. So that's my only real gripe about it.
The only other thing I could think of in terms of the potential criticism is that they're making armor class a more complicated system. And I haven't looked into things like if they still keep the flat-footed, if they still keep that kind of stuff or touch. But having to concentrate and make sure that you're keeping track of your energy armor class or your kinetic armor class, in addition to everything else, kind of seems like they're bulking that up slightly. Now, I do understand that they're looking at different ways of damaging a given person, but it just feels like they're bulking to a certain extent.
Right. I can see that criticism. When we get to the combat stuff, I'll say why I don't really see it as too much of a problem, but we'll get there. All right. Any other comments on characters and stats and stuff like that before we go into the races?
Just to make it clear, you don't have flat-footed and touch AC. So you only have these two, energy armor class and kinetic armor class. So I would argue that it's actually easier in this.
Yeah, less bulk in that case. I haven't seen that portion as of yet.
Are we going to get to leveling at any point, or is this sort of where we'd be concluding that part?
Actually, yeah, that does bring up the idea of leveling and how they. So, what are your comments on leveling, Colin? Before I go into my comments on leveling,
I wasn't going to go too far into the leveling, but I did want to point out that they do have an option in there with GM discretion, where if you like a character but you don't like the way that they're built or the way that the mechanics are working out, that there is a retraining option to a limited extent.
Right. In the core rulebook. I think that's a good
core
step.
rulebook.
Yeah. Not in advanced tactics or something like that.
Which I can definitely see how that could be a good thing in a lot of situations, especially for newer players that don't know the mechanics that well.
I think so too. My comments on leveling was I was surprised with how they switched up your leveling. You still get, stuff, but your ability increases. I was surprised because the difference between certain characters at certain levels is going to be actually more substantial. You're going to have 4 levels can make a lot of difference. It can in any game. In Pathfinder, it really depended on what class you picked as far as what you were doing at each level and how that was changing things out. And it still does in this. But now it also depends on your level is going to increase your ability score if it's below 18 by 2 when you level. When you get to a certain level. Until you get to it's to 18, which I think is also going to be an influencer on the NPCs that they build. So those NPCs that are of a higher CR than certain other ones, that may be may actually indicate quite a bit more challenge than it did in the past. Now we'll have to see how it fleshes out in the combat, but that may be something to watch for in the future, because we haven't had a bestiary yet. So once we get a bestiary, or maybe they'll call it a race archive or something, more techy. I don't know, but I am curious to see their ways of balancing that out. Now they do have a level 20 enemy listed in the core rulebook. As kind of it's not a joke, but it's just kind of in there to show, hey, this is what it's going to kind of look like. But it's a goblin commando dude with a cracked space helmet. It was the Paizo Goblin, so that's funny to me. Okay, so any other statements about level progression or things like that?
I got one thing.
Mhm.
That is skill points. Thank you, Paizo. The lowest skill points you can get is 4 plus int.
Yes. Man.
You mean my paladin who gets 2 plus int and with his negative intelligence modifier has issues? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. 'Cause you better hope you're good in combat, because you definitely couldn't compete elsewhere.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So that was something that I also liked.
Yeah.
The idea that and I think that fits well with the idea that, this is in the future, there's more skills are more important. You got to know things, you got to do things. I think that does fit well with the progression of Starfinder itself into the future of the Galorian universe and so on. So yeah.
I think there was also something in regards to the hit points, if I remember correctly. I thought it was in our Facebook chat, or I read it somewhere, but how they've, instead of you having to roll a die for a random amount of hit points, you're actually taking your race's hit points plus your class's hit points and basically combining them at each step alongside your constitution, making it a more guaranteed progression versus, I got my max out in first level, but my next level I rolled a 1, and as a barbarian that is going to kill me.
Yeah.
There's a reason why most people homebrew that you take the full hit dice, the highest possible on the first level, because if you roll a 1, you die if you get poked by anything, regardless of your constitution score.
Yep. Because everything is going to have enough of a damage die to be able to take 2 points of damage out of you. So, yeah. Yes, I am glad that was a thing. That shift from rolling for hit points versus that. And it makes more sense when you think about, well, this race is more naturally hardy. It doesn't make sense for them to have a if it's a barbarian, to have 13 hit points at level 2. That doesn't make sense for a barbarian of the orcs or something. So it makes a lot more sense that they have a basic starting hit point pool. And then the stamina points are what make up for that idea of they didn't put a lot into charisma, so it's no big deal. And then you have that cushion there to prevent you from dying outright. I did like that. I like that a lot. And it leads into our next section, which is races. So, Greg, before I go into any of my thoughts or anything like that, we'll give you the floor first. What were your opinions of the races?
You know what? I was actually quite impressed with a lot of the different races. I'm actually looking at them here because it doesn't just assume, for instance, it doesn't assume everybody's humanoid necessarily. It actually looks at the idea like you could have insects, you can have automatons, you can have pretty much anything you want. Whereas I did find that one thing about, even with Pathfinder in and of itself, is that it was very much humanoid driven. You get 2 arms, you get 2 legs, unless you're going for some homebrewed centaur thing. Because I don't think that was an actual race that got put out by anybody necessarily.
Technically, you could play a centaur. He was in the advanced race guide.
Oh, there you go. But at the same time, that's not the core book. That's still, you have to wait until the extra stuff comes out. And I've only got the SRD, so I don't see a lot of the actual photos from the book. The one thing I have here, though, that I did see that I thought was really intriguing was their version of androids.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure if that's the same photo that you have in your book, but I thought it was a really interesting look at it from the standpoint of, yes, you have the photo has some humanistic features. However, it definitely looks mechanical. Whereas a lot of times when you see androids, they're very, data-esque. These guys definitely went to, this is a construct. This is definitely something that's going to need wires to go between things. This is definitely something that's going to have pathways along the surface, etc.
Yep, I like that also.
The other thing I really liked was the fact that they actually went into the different racial traits. They went a little bit deeper into that. And even sort of looked at the relations between the different races themselves, which I found very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And Paizo has been fairly good about building up lore for their worlds, and I'm fairly satisfied with the lore I've seen. What about you, Alex? How have you felt about these races?
I mean, there are plenty of them for a core rulebook, I would say. I like that they added a little box where it says this is probably what you would be doing if you're of this race, and this is probably how others would look at you and think about you. But at the same time, it's like, well, what if I want to play like a Vesk spellcaster or something? It's a lot more punishing, I think, by the looks of it, than Pathfinder. In Pathfinder, you could play a gnome barbarian. It wouldn't be optimal because you're small, and that means your attack die is lower and everything. But you could really do it. But here you have the hit points from the race, which can really hamper you. So I'm a little bit concerned that you will fall into these already constructed roles, that if you are of this race you should play this class, and why would you play that class ever? Even just for fun, why would you play that other class?
I can see the thing you're bringing up. Yeah, the same thing we like about the idea of having your hit points tied to race also creates that situation. I don't know that it'll, with stamina being such a big thing, I'm not sure that it's going to be mechanically problematic. We'll have to see how things roll out, because it may work out to where you can still play like an Isoki soldier thing. So don't know. We'll have to see. That'll be something. What about you, Colin? How have you felt about the races?
I thought they were pretty interesting, the different races that they have. There was one in there. It was like a four-armed race, which
The Kasathas? Mm-hmm.
did not work mechanically. I didn't get a chance to read all the description about it. But you could potentially have a quad-wielding character there, which I don't know how that might work mechanically. That would be weird for sure.
Well, one of his arms is treated as his main arm, and then all others are treated as secondary. So basically, he only gets to use all four arms. She only gets to use all four arms if he has a full attack option. Okay. So it does kind of, yeah, it doesn't, And even so, there's no. This is mainly more of a combat thing, but there's no multiple attacks in Starfinder. You get a round. What are you going to do with that round? Are you going to attack? Okay, go ahead and attack. You going to do anything else? Okay, you're not? Okay. Level does not give you more attacks from what we've been seeing. So you're not going to get this really massive overburden of, well, this guy's taking 4 attacks a round. No, he can't. He only gets 1 attack a round. So there is that. They do have it balanced that way.
Just since Kane isn't here, we talked a little bit about the standard fantasy races a little bit.
Right.
He mentioned.
I actually want to get to those at the end when it goes to the Pathfinder Legacy.
Okay.
Portion.
Then
we'll touch on them.
2 other things. One thing I liked was that they pointed out that androids were technological creations crafted to resemble some humans, so that might be why they look so different, which I thought was an interesting take on androids compared to what you normally see with them being like part human, part robot.
Right. I hate it when settings will say, "Oh, they're androids, but they're technically cyborgs."
Yeah.
Because in Starfinder, cyborgs are a thing. I mean, people are modifying themselves all the time. So there's an important distinction there. They're androids, not cyborgs.
Yeah, they do. They do that in Dragon Ball. It's not okay.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that.
The other thing I wanted to point out was that I thought it was interesting how there were some playable races from the First Contact booklet that didn't make it into the core rulebook, which I think is very interesting that they would release that first and then not put it.
Right. Those were probably a lot like playtests.
Probably.
Like D&D Next was for 5e. So
yeah, I can see that.
We'll probably see those races later,
but probably they'll be different.
Right. Well, they may be different. They may be a little changed up depending on how the mechanics changed in their testing. I haven't got to see that one, so.
It was interesting because the one I was referring to gave you +4 intelligence, but you were also atrophied, and so you could only move by floating around from place to place. So there's some weird stuff.
A much more non-humanoid based race.
Yeah, the picture they have in there is just this giant brain and this little tiny body with arms just sort of poking around.
Okay, see, that actually brings me to my comments, because one of the things that I didn't like, that I would have preferred, I can't say that I didn't like it, I just would have preferred it if the races that were not humanoid were a bit more monstrous looking, or had something more monstrous going for them. But as it stands, I'm satisfied with what they've given. I like that they've got some heritage races in here, like the androids were already in in Pathfinder and other Splat books. Humans were already in Pathfinder, of course. The Lashuntas and the Kasathas were also already in Pathfinder. And then it's arguable that the Ahsoki were also already in Pathfinder, because they're basically just rat folk. Even the stuff points out that they are not the same species of creature, that they evolved on different planets, but the same type of creature evolved on those different planets. I do like the Shirines as far as their looks. Even though they aren't quite as monstrous as I might have liked them to be, they are definitely monstrous enough for you to know, hey, these guys are different. These guys are bugs, basically. And you can see that very easily. The Vesk, the same way. They don't look really exactly like lizard folk. They don't look exactly like what were those? the Lasatham or something like that. There were also a kind of lizardy type creature, serpent type creature that was big and bulky. They are their own creature, which I like. And I must say, I must give credit where credit is due. Thank you, Paizo. There are no lizard boobs. There are no lizard boobs in Starfinder. That bugged me about the Dragonborn, even though I like Dragonborn as a race. Okay, I'm not dissing Dragonborn for all you Dragonborn lovers, but they're reptiles. They're not mammalian. Why do they have boobs? Oh, so that they look pretty in dresses. But yeah, I liked that the Vesk and the Shireen, they didn't have those same type of differences. In fact, if you were to go based upon the anatomy of what we know about reptilian or insectoid races, the females would actually be the larger ones, and the larger and stronger ones, and the males might not necessarily be. That does bring me to a point that I didn't like about the Lashuntas, in that Lashuntas and Pathfinder are sexually dimorphic, incredibly so. Even to the point where they have they'll have a straight stat boost on one stat, but a male and a female will have a different stat boost on another stat in Pathfinder. And I actually wish they would have kept that in this one, because that sexual dimorphism made them very unique, and it made their race feel very it made it feel a lot more relatable, in the sense that, oh, this is what they do. It was a lot easier to understand and grasp the role-playing aspects of that race. Now they just kind of fuzzed the lines, and they're all get the same, which it really wouldn't have gone that way if evolution were true. If I believed evolution were true, that wouldn't have gone that way, really, because those dimorphisms usually maintain themselves through evolutionary lines. But anyway, that's kind of my thing with the Lashuntas. I wish they would have kept that. Small nitpick on that. Let me see.
Well, to be completely
Okay,
honest, they did the exact same thing with Drow in 5th edition,
Oh, that's right.
where they took the
Yeah.
dimorphism of the Drow male-female dichotomy and blended that all together.
Oh, did they? That's lore breaking right there. Sorry.
Just a little bit. The women are supposed to be bigger. They're supposed to be stronger. They're supposed to be in charge. The men are supposed to be submissive. That was not the case in this.
Because in
Right. Well,
Pathfinder, Pathfinder's like, well, the females are the ones leading, and they are most likely the ones with spell casting capabilities, but there are exceptions, which kind of gives you this leeway. But it's not set in stone that you can't be a wizard male drow.
Right. So I definitely, like I said, I wish they would have kept that about the Lashuntas, but I'm willing to accept their new paradigm for this particular system. Pathfinder still stays the same, but this particular system, I'm okay with. So does anybody else have any comments about the racial stuff? If not, then let's move on to classes. So, what was everyone's kind of impressions and feelings about the different classes? Let's start with Alex this time.
There's not a lot of classes compared to the Pathfinder core, which has 11. This one has
1,
7?
2, 3, 5, 6, 7. 7.
7, yeah.
7, and that's not counting the archetypes within. So yeah.
I mean, just looking at them, it's the same thing as Pathfinder. You get something neat every level, it seems, for most of them, which is nice. So there are no like dead levels as in Pathfinder. You just like, oh, I get a +1 to my saves, and that's it. But it seems like you do get something. I'm not sure if everyone does, but most of them does every level, which is always nice.
Mm-hmm. I liked that also. I think that the themes also sub in on some of those levels that are in there, if I remember right. I'd have to look back. But yeah.
But I do miss a couple of classes, definitely.
What would be a class that you would want in there if you had your way with it?
I mean, they could put a barbarian in there to really flesh out the Vesk kind of soldier-ish. Because they have the soldier, which is the fighter, but they don't have a barbarian. I'd say they could have that, definitely. Not sure what else, but I'm sure they could find something and put in there.
Yeah. So I would agree that the choices are smaller in the class portions. I think there's still a lot of variety within them, but as far as the actual amount of classes that you get to choose from, yeah, not quite as much as I would have liked necessarily. How about you, Colin? What are your opinions on these classes?
The funny thing is, I was looking through the brief descriptions of each of them, and I was like, oh, okay, so that one's similar to the Bard. This one's similar to the Ranger. This one's similar to Cleric, and was able to make a lot of the draws towards. I do think they're really interesting in the way that they've pulled this through in terms of how they pull these together to make them mesh with the other characters and what have you. It's quite interesting the way that they've played it. Like for instance, like the expertise of the Envoy, where it lets you add a D6 or 2D6 to an ability roll, which places a lot more emphasis on the abilities in the game versus just your standard combat. Or the fact that, like for instance, the mechanic gets bypass, or they're looking at it from a very much taking it from a combat-driven setup to a certain extent to a more, okay, we're going to solve this puzzle, and here's how we can solve this puzzle in different ways based on the classes we have.
I do think that's in there. I think I'm seeing what you're saying. I definitely agree, because you're having these classes, and they get enough proficiencies with things to be able to be like, okay, we can handle this situation this way. So if they got to get into a locked room, there's multiple ways that they can get in, multiple boosts that can be had. So I do see that for sure. How about you, Colin?
One thing I noticed, forgive me if you've already said this, but a lot of the classes seemed like reskinned Pathfinder classes, just different names to them. But there was one thing, maybe I'm missing it, but I couldn't figure out which Pathfinder class it went to, and that was the Envoy.
The Envoy?
Yeah. It's rogue.
It's the Bard.
It's rogue. Yeah, it's,
Bard.
If you took a rogue and a Bard, and they had a baby, and it lived in a techno world, it would be the Envoy.
Fair enough.
What I think they did is they took that, and then they said, okay, people are going to choose their themes. So the themes and the class are going to play together into what they actually decide to play. In the book, you don't get to see it on the line, but in the book, they'll have these sections like this, and they'll list off a few samples of what someone might be. Like the rat folk there, he's a scoundrel. His theme is outlaw, but he chose the envoy ability, and then it talks about good choices for that and different feat choices that would work well with that, and skills to spec into and stuff like that. But then it also has the negotiator, who took envoy but also took icon as their theme. And I think what they were doing is letting people use both in conjunction to make the character, because like backgrounds and traits from past editions, those fell into the background. Those are what happened before. They are not you now. The themes are what your character's thematically doing now, and your class is how they're doing it. So I think they have it working together in that way. Like the operative, it is a rogue, but it's also a little bit more of a spy type rogue if you build it that way. But if you choose soldier as your background, it may be more of a combatant style, a more fighter-ish rogue, a more brawler style rogue than someone who instead would choose something like ace pilot. So I definitely see. I think that's what they were going for, and I think it'll pan out well within its own rule set, because that means you're going to get bestiaries or archives, enemy archives, or whatever they want to say, full of things like soldier envoys. Soldier envoys, or envoys with several different levels, and multi-classing in this one will, I don't know, I'm still wrapping my head around the main class thing. So multi-classing in this one would be okay, especially when you get something each level. A level dip of 2 or 3 is going to make a difference in your character, especially when, like we talked about, your stats aren't going to be super low. You're going to have bonuses in most of your stats unless you just don't spec into them. And you're not going to have any negatives in your stats if you just follow the basic rules, which I would encourage someone to do if you're not going to get a bonus or any kind of extra points to spend for dumping into an 8. But I like the classes pretty well. I think that the Solarian is a bit odd to me. I think that's the one that has to balance graviton and photon or something like that energy. So that one might get a bit odd for me. I'm not sure I'd ever really play that one very much. But the others are like the Technomancer is basically the Sorcerer Wizard or the Arcanist, and so on and so forth. And the Mystic is the Cleric and the Orison and the War Priest, or however you'd want to play it. So, any other comments about class?
Actually, based upon what you were saying in terms of the themes and as well as the classes, yes, you have 7 classes. However, as you said, based upon which theme you choose, that really can work out to be closer to 30 or 40 different play styles based upon what you've chosen.
Right. So you basically take the classes and then you multiply them by every different theme you can pick. And all of a sudden, you got a whole lot of different classes. And I think that's what they were going for. I'm still with Alex, though. I would have liked to have seen a Vesk Barbarian or something like that. That seems very thematic. Seems very Klingon, which is what the Vesk really feel like. They feel like Klingons. Now, they're not carbon copies. I understand that. But they really feel that way. So I'd like to have had that. And I'm sure we'll get more classes in the future. Paizo has had, in my opinion, has had a good start with this one, so they're probably going to keep it up. So, any other statements on that. All right. Let's go into skills then. So, I'll start this one off. I am so pleased that there's not 30 or 40 different skills that you have to worry about remembering do what and using at the right time. I am very pleased that there's only 20 skills and you can spread your points, which you get enough of. Not too much necessarily, but enough. You get enough of to actually do some stuff in. So that's my statement. Thank you, Paizo, for not overloading a bunch of skills in here, because it would be really easy to, in this type of a game, in this type of a setting, a tech setting, to try and say, well, this skill's different than this skill. I'm glad that they kept it kind of, hey, 20. Colin, do you have any feelings on that one?
Not much of a chance to look into the skill system. In fact, I just was able to pull it up now.
Okay. Well, they function very similar to what they used to.
Yeah.
Alex, you've had a lot of experience, like we said, with Pathfinder, and they have like 32 skills or 30 skills or something like that in Pathfinder. 28, I don't remember, somewhere in that number.
I mean, you have like 20 knowledge skills, so
yeah,
something.
20 separate knowledge skills.
Something like that. I mean, some skills seem a lot stronger, like acrobatics and athletics, because they cover so much more now. Athletics is your climb, your jump, your swim, all of that. So it's very interesting that they give you more points, but also less skills that you need. I like that they added different bonuses to your profession. Now it can be charisma, intelligence, or wisdom. But profession still feels like a kind of meh skill. It's not the one. It's not the one you need to pick. It's the one you could consider picking because it fits the theme that you're coming up with. But it's not fulfilling that much for you, I think. Medicine seems useful as opposed to first aid in Pathfinder, which was like, if you need to stabilize someone and you don't have any magical healing, you roll first aid. Otherwise, you don't use first aid. Like, almost never. Yes, you can do long-term care, and it just bogs down the game, but usually does not. You just wait, sleep, get your cleric spell slots up and heal, and that's it. But now with medicine here, it seems like you can actually use it more in game to make everything go quicker. It seems more useful, but it still seems a bit limited with long-term care and everything. But we'll see. Overall, though, I like the skills. I do.
Right, and we'll have to see. Also, I believe they're. Let me make sure so I don't say wrong. But where did those go? Magic and spells. Casting range, targets, duration. I'm looking to see. It doesn't look like there's components anymore on things.
For spells, you mean?
What?
For spells, or?
For spells.
Yeah, they removed all the casting components, which is a bit of a shame because it's a nice, like, thematic thing, but it's it's too much ruling, and you can't keep track on all the spells that like. There are divine focuses, and there are focuses, and there are components that you need to spend in order to do this, and there are components that you don't need to spend that's just there for fluff, because everyone has a spell component pouch. And there's somatic components, and I like the idea of components, but there's just too much stuff.
Yeah. I also like the idea, like you said. I understand why they took it out. And I brought it up at this point because medicine, I feel it would have been even more useful if components were still a thing and those healers were out of them, or their divine focus was somehow, there's not even a divine focus now. There's some problem with connecting to the deity or something like that, so you had to have some magic healing, but you couldn't. So I thought that it would have been even better if that was a thing, but it's not. So, yeah, I like the improvement on medicine.
Bad Wi-Fi connection, can't connect to your deity. Sorry guys, no healing. Yeah. I got 1 bar.
Bad Wi-Fi. Bad Wi-Fi can't connect to the Triune AI.
Yeah.
Just 1 second. My focus. I got to hold it in the air for a little bit.
Yeah.
Adjust the antenna. The Shirene's like moving his antennas.
Yeah.
No. What about you, Greg? What if did you get a chance to fiddle and look at the?
Yeah. One of the biggest improvements I would have to say is the fact that crafting skill no longer exists, but based upon your understanding of, say, engineering, computers, or what have you, like. You could basically turn anything into a crafting skill as long as you have the understanding that would be required for it based upon other skills. So it's not like you're spending skill points on just a crafting set, which I found really, really interesting.
To just chime in on that, there are no crafting feats.
Yeah.
No crafting feats.
That's a big deal.
That's a huge
for
deal.
feat economy.
Oh,
it's a big deal.
Well, and plus, it also doesn't necessarily have a disabled device. But let's say you're good at engineering, you can bypass a door. Let's say you're good at computers, you can hack it. You know, they've really kind of looked at it from a standpoint of, we're going to give you the skills. Based upon your skills, you can then figure out the heck you're going to do versus, oh, you come across a lock, you need a disabled device. You know.
Right. You're not skill locked out of something. I am glad they kept the thing where there are still some class skills, if I remember right. There are still skills that are limited to class, the training. So you can't just attempt anything. And I like that. Because in 5e, I appreciated that the fighter could walk up and be like, there's a lock. I'm going to pick it. And the rogue be like, no problem. I got it. No, I got it. And he rolls a 20. What did he do? Did he just rip the lock off? I mean, how did that work for a fighter with no thieves' tools or stuff like that to be able to do that? Yeah. So I like that they didn't do that. So any other statements on skills? We're getting close to halfway through.
The one thing I was looking at in terms of, at least on the SRD, it actually looks at things that will increase the DC modifier of sets, and it looks like you can get DCs of 40, and you're still expected to be able to pass that, which looks interesting, potentially.
Well, they got more skills, you got more feat availability to dump into those skills, and this is Paizo. I mean, I've seen the numbers you guys roll when you roll for stuff at level 5. I know what's going on here, especially when you consider the fact that you can get more. You can get progressively stronger in those skills with those 2 points per increase on a skill on a ability score before you hit 18, and then it's 1 after that. But still, it's definitely something that I don't think is going to be too much of a problem for my players if I know what's their experience. So let's take a quick kind of breeze through feats, because we are not going to cover all feats or all spells when we get to spells. We're not going to cover all that. Do you have any kind of impressions from the feats? I'm getting the impression that they're pretty much, it's a pretty similar system to what they've already been doing. There's still some qualifiers for certain ones, but the trees aren't as large yet. That'll probably happen later as they get a bit more splat in their books. But most of them seem
feats,
pretty good.
I'd say less feats, and just with the skills. For example, deadly aim is basically power attack, but also for ranged weapons. So it's more versatile. So you can use it with any type of attack, rather than just melee or range, depending on which feat you had in Pathfinder.
I agree. And I think that's speaking a lot to what they're expecting people to do with this particular system. They're not expecting people to just walk around, unless they're a spellcaster or something. They don't just walk around with one weapon. They expect people to use a couple different things, or at least keep a couple different things on their person. You might have a extendable baton for your melee, and you might have a gun, but you've got a melee and you've got a gun. I think that's going to be a thing that's going to pop in, because we're already doing that in our games. Most of my spellcaster still carries around his beaten stick. So, I mean, he only does it when they're on the ground, helpless, but he does it. So
yeah, it's more for comedic effect than anything else. But
you actually succeeded in doing some damage.
Yeah, I mean, you can roll a 1 and a 2 sometimes.
So there's that.
Now, if only I could do a power attack with my bow. No, I'm kidding.
Well, there's different feat for that in Pathfinder.
Yeah.
Or you get gravity bow. It's a sweet thing. But okay. Does anyone have any kind of opinions on these feats?
You know, one thing I thought was interesting, I noticed that there were a couple feats I didn't see in Pathfinder, and maybe I just missed them, but versatile focus and versatile specialization.
Right, those weren't in Pathfinder.
In Starfinder feats. Huh?
Yeah, to my knowledge, those weren't in Pathfinder. They switched stuff around. They didn't just carbon copy over feats and change the wording to make them fit the setting. They made new feats.
Yeah.
Or they changed old feats to fit them in with them, not just the setting, but the mechanics of how they work. There are some stinkers still, but that's all right. There's always going to be stinkers.
Yep. I just thought it was interesting how there are feats that would do that. And another thing I noticed about those particular feats is, going back to classes a little bit, soldiers apparently get bonus feats.
Yeah.
And there's certain ones that you can select for that, including those versatile focus and versatile specialization feats.
Right. So soldier is not just stuck being what we would consider the traditional fighter role. He can do a few more things, especially getting skill points like he does, because he's going to get at least that many. I don't think any of them take a dip in int. I think they take a dip in wisdom and stuff like that, but not in int, if I remember right. But yeah, I'm pleased with what I've seen thus far on the feeds. So if there's no more on that, we can pop over to equipment. And so how are you guys feeling about the equipment that we've got in the core rulebook? Let's start with Greg.
The one thing I was noticing is, because I've only made it through a couple of the different things, it's interesting how they've done, like, for instance, the armor. There are so many different options in terms of the armor itself, and it actually looks at it from the standpoint of, it looks like you have to be a specific level in order to use it.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought it was quite interesting to look at it from that standpoint versus just having a currency threshold. You also have to look at it from a standpoint of, you need to be a certain level in order to take advantage of this. I was also looking at it from the standpoint of, interestingly enough, the heavy armor, like I was just taking a look, if you look at it from the standpoint of the heavy armor versus the light armor, what looks like is the top tier armor, which I show here is Hard Light Series Specialist, level 20 armor, versus the, let's say, the Aegis Series Specialist. There's not a lot of difference between the AC bonuses.
Right. The item level is not how high you have to be. It's when it usually appears in a campaign.
Oh, okay.
So that's mainly for the GM. So that's when it mainly appears in the campaign.
Fair enough. That was just a misunderstanding on my side then. But it looks like it's a really interesting setup in that regard. Plus, you've got the computers. You've got the one thing I found quite entertaining is that they actually put drugs into the system itself, not just medicinal or poisons, but they've actually put drugs. But it looks interesting, or the side point of you build your own starship.
Yes, that is something that's going to be getting to, because that's something that I'm interested in. I'm glad that they gave you vehicles in the core rulebook that you can look at, like the Goblin Junk Cycle and the Police Cruiser. So if you're being chased by the police on Andoran or wherever that thing is, yeah, you know how fast it can go. And you know it's no good to shoot at it because it's not going to. They run on different statistics and stuff like that. So I do think that'll be fun. We'll get to starships in a minute, but that'll be fun. So I will say that something that I'm sure people will like is that they did away with different types of currency. There is just your credit stick. That makes it a lot more simpler when dealing with stuff. You don't get 500 copper in a chest.
But I love copper.
You can get 500. You can get 500 credits, but not 500 copper. And you always have that. Something that I also liked was the bulk mechanic and the L, which stands for if you get 10 L items, it makes 1 bulk. So instead of pounds or kilograms or weight, you basically have a pool that you can carry. I think that makes it a lot easier for people to get into, and encumbrance is a lot easier to handle and understand and still implement in your games when you understand that I can carry this much bulk. That's it. And
you don't have a little sorceress who can't carry her own coins because she doesn't have enough strength.
Yeah, you can't do that because you can't dump stats.
Could you replace copper with like 500 gift certificates or something?
Oh, that would be so evil. Oh, if I run a campaign, I'll have to do that. You guys come across 500 Starbucks gift cards, each of them for 1 credit.
Oh man.
All right. Any other remarks about equipment specifically? We'll get to our thoughts on the Starfighters in a second. All right. If not, let's move on to the tactical rules. And this is basically how combat works. So, Alex, looking it over, how are you liking how this is comparing? Or at least how are you liking how it is seeming to work out?
I mean, it looks very standard with initiative and damage and saves, and can't really. I mean, the only thing is the damage, which is different with the stamina and such, but can't really say much about it right now.
Okay. What about you, Colin? You seeing anything that's either giving you concerns or looking at it funny?
Not really. I feel like I'd have to play how it would work out. I can't just imagine it in my head. I'd have to actually try it. Sort of like be sort of like a game of chess, because in chess you don't really, you can imagine all the strategies you want without having ever played the game, but until you actually play the game against an opponent, you don't know how any of them are going to work out. That's how I feel.
Right. Do you hold the same sentiments, Greg?
One of the things I noticed is that, again, they're taking, it looks like a page from 5th edition where they're removing the critical ranges and sticking between, you either have your critical miss or your critical hits. It looks like they're also getting rid of the critical miss in terms of you have an issue from it, just that you automatically miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And it
Right.
feels very 5th edition-esque in that regard. The one thing I'm going to just jump back quickly in terms of, at least because we're talking about combat weapons apply, I was looking at the scaling of the damages. That is going to be insane.
Well,
Yes,
remember,
I am going to pull I'm just going to pull up the sniper weapon or whatever the heck it was, because that thing just killed me. I think it was something in the range of, there it is. Yeah, here, let me roll 10d10. Like, they've got a lot of these things where it's getting into some ridiculous, here we are, 12d10 damage.
remember you're taking stamina first.
But still, I'm just
yeah.
from the standpoint of, there's going to be some large numbers.
Right. I don't think their numbers are going to be smaller. I do think the numbers, like I said, when we were talking about leveling, I think that levels will actually be fairly important. That they'll, and this will come into play with your enemies and your CRs and stuff like that. I think CRs are actually going to be a bigger indicator of the problems that creature can cause to a party. Shadows in Pathfinder are only CR 3 or something like that, but they do strength damage and they're hard to hit. Those two things make them very dangerous for a CR 3. I don't think it's going to be quite the same in Starfinder. I think Starfinder, those CRs are going to, if you've got a CR5 and he's fighting CR3s, those CR3s are at a really big disadvantage from what I'm seeing in the numbers.
So killing the CR7 Bargus at level 2 or 3 is not likely going to happen anymore?
Probably not. But you could get the drop on him. And that'll also be a big factor in your campaigns. What happens if your players are able to take down that level 5 person and get stuff get gear from a level 5 person, scavenge it off a level 5 that they are only at like level 2 or 3. That's going to shift their own game's abilities up. So it's going to have a lot of give and take on that. I think there's going to be a lot of more risk reward when it comes to that type of a setup. You can go for those riskier missions, but what happens if you do? You got to kill that guy, and he could probably kill you pretty easy. So I do see that coming. Let me see. With the tactical stuff, I liked that they split the ACs like we talked about. I actually like that idea. I like that there's not flat-footed. I like that. Well, I can't say I like it. I'm of mixed opinions about certain things they did with the CMB combat maneuvers. The AC is a lot more simpler now. It's a lot simpler, but it's a lot harder to hit too. Just imagine trying to trip a fully power armored person with a maneuver. That'll be redonkulous because they get a plus. It's their KAC, their kinetic armor class, +8, plus something else or something like that. So it's like plus enough that like a level 1 trying to trip a level 1 is going to be hard. And I'm the type of person that I wanted to make a grappler in 5e, and I was upset that I couldn't make him effectively. I was going for the full Goliath grappler barbarian that was going to wail on people. He was the big old direwolf dude, and he was going to whoosh. But no, couldn't do that because they could just get out. They could just get away. Or they could stand up from prone. I'm like, what? I'm coming from Pathfinder where prone, it gives you an AOO. What are you talking about? That's a big deal. So I agree that I'm going to have to see how these pan out. I like combat maneuvers when they're done right. So hopefully they'll either come out with an archetype or something like that where we can have a bit more leeway in that area.
I was just about to touch on the combat maneuvers.
Yeah.
It's nice that you don't need a feat to not provoke an attack of opportunity.
Yes.
Because people don't take these feats for 2 reasons. The first is that you need like prerequisites, and these are usually not that good. Things like combat expertise, which is like no one wants it, but you want that trip or whatever it is. So it's nice that you can perform these maneuvers without special training. But I do hope that there is some way to make these combat maneuvers effective even against heavy armored targets, because there are essentially 3 ways in Pathfinder to defeat someone. Either you knock them out with doing enough damage to their health, or you cast some sort of spell to attack their saves, or you use your CMB against their CMD to shackle them somehow. And in Starfinder that doesn't seem to be the case, because if you have a really, really powerful armor, you are immune effectively or very resistant to both maneuvers and attacks. And that's a bit of a concern from my part.
Yeah. So hopefully they'll do some either, I don't want them to necessarily do errata, but do something to make combat maneuvers viable. Because in a technological situation where you're talking about using your smarts, which is what Starfinder seems to really hinge on. It's not just about strength, but it's about tactics in that battle. I think that it would behoove them to make maneuvers something that the enemy and the player have to think about. They have to keep it in mind, because what if they trip me, or what if I get knocked prone? You still take the negatives from being knocked prone, but I don't think it provokes an AOO. I'd have to look again. But that's something that I would really like. So, anyway, any other comments about combat or how we think it might or might not work out? All right. That means we're into the starship part. And whoo, boy. Colin, what do you think about starships?
I mean, it seems like a lot of fun, but also a lot of work, which sounds sort of like what it would actually end up being if you were to build your own starship. Sort of like building a PC from scratch is what it seems like to me.
Best summation ever. Looks like a lot of fun, but a lot of work. I think that's true. I think that's true. What about you, Greg? What are you thinking of these starships?
This is gonna be fun.
Yeah. I know, right?
I don't know. There's something about it to me that just seems like not only do they give you categories, not only do they give you sizes, but it lets you kind of design it yourself in the sense of, it doesn't have to be your standard, Firefly, Star Trek, Star Wars style spaceship. You can kind of do whatever the hell you want with it. And it looks really cool because of the fact that you can customize it. You've got the different sizes. Like, do you want to, let's say you want to do a Firefly-esque thing. Get yourself a medium-sized ship or maybe a small-sized ship and do it. If you want to be, let's say you want to take over the galaxy. You've got yourself the Dreadnought, the colossal fucking starship that's got a minimum crew of 125 people. You've got so many mounts for different weapons. You've got stuff. And you can put your fighters in said Dreadnought. Like,
I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
And again, a lot of work, as Colin said. But if you have the person that's playing the mechanic building it, I mean, he's already got his little stuff. He's already in the tinkering mindset. I think it'll be great, or just anybody.
Or hell, the idea of I'm going to raid your ship and steal it, kind of makes some really interesting gameplay.
Yeah, you may not go into an encounter saying I want to kill these people. You may be saying I just want their ship. You could literally go and steal somebody's ship. That's all you want. Just their ship. Just to get away with their ship. That's it. You don't have to hurt no one. Don't have to, you're just gonna defend yourself while you're stealing their ship. So you want the Millennium Falcon. Man, it's right there, sitting right there. I want it. Well, it's right there. Why don't you go get it? Because there's a big freaking Wookiee on it. That's why. So what about you, Alex? How are you feeling about the starships?
Coming from Rogue Trader from 40k, I know the struggle of building your own ship with a lot of people on it. Because in 40k, you don't have 10 people on your ship. You have 10,000, 10 million people. Like, you have so many people on your ship. It's ridiculous. And the difference is, of course, size. But it kind of boils down to the same issue that that Rogue Trader has, that I think Starfinder will have, is that fact that you are free in space with your own ship. You can go wherever you want, whenever you want. and the GM is just hoping that you'll go that way and not
Hey.
just turn around halfway.
Every ship needs fuel, right? You got to have credits for fuel.
I'm just going to bring up Fox.
Folks, hey, I'm sure they're going to convert. Hey, they're going to convert Kasune over to. So
Skip
make
over
a
half the
Starfall.
damn module, why don't we?
Yeah.
But
All right.
it is satisfying to build your own ship and modify it. But it's a lot of work, and it can get out of hand so easily. But if you have a good group and a good GM and can keep it together, it can be wonderful.
Right. And I think that one of the things that's going to bar entry to this for some is the cost, because it ain't cheap. So that may be why someone's adventuring. That may be why they want to go to a place just to steal a ship. There's lots of things that can make just getting your own starship can be a whole half a campaign. Just getting your own ship can be a whole character goal to become the captain of their own vessel. Is really, really great. I think that's a really good option to have, especially when you're talking about star travel. Because like you said, you can go anywhere. Now you're going to have to stay where you can have fuel, but you can go anywhere. I also liked, this comes back to my aesthetic likings of the Starfinder stuff. The Starfinder book had Enochian styled starships, and I'm like, that's just freaking cool. It is literally an undead ship, an undead starship. That's just awesome. And for those that aren't familiar with the lore, the Eoxian, Eox is a planet within the Galarian solar system in Pathfinder. Well, it's an undead planet. The whole place is permeated with negative energy and stuff like that. So it makes sense that they would have that. And then they have the Kasathan ships, which are nice and smooth with desert tones. And the Pact World styled ships, which look pretty much like you would think a human would design a ship. Kind of utilitarian with a few cosmetic paint jobs. The Shireen looks like insectoid. And it's just really good how the concepts came through. The Veshkaran look a lot, kind of Romulan. When you think about it. They look kind of Romulan.
I'm waiting for the Borg cube.
The Borg cube, you can build it. You could be the Borg. I mean, in this game, you could be the Borg, because technically everybody's getting implants. Everybody's getting all, teched up. But yeah, I like it. I think that it was a good idea for them to go for the hex grid for their combat for starships. It will be interesting to see how they decide to integrate ship combat, because you can go below or above. It'll be a lot like flying combat trying to do that. It'll be a lot like underwater combat trying to do that. That can be a bit tricky. So as long as it doesn't get too complicated in your heads, I think it'll be good.
I can't remember what it was, but there was a Star Wars tabletop game which was all about flight combat and space combat. Wonder if they'd use a similar system to that to a certain extent.
I don't know. I never played that, so I'm not sure. I don't have a reference for comparison. But it seems pretty... I think that one functioned off of hexes as well, so it seems like it took inspirations from there.
I don't think they will do a 3D game about it. It will be a flat 2D space. You can't fly under the ship or over the ship. I mean, maybe with like a special kind of maneuverability thing, but you won't have like a 3D grid or anything like that.
Come on, I wanted to pull the first episode of the Orville and hug the donkey. Come on now. For anybody who's actually seen the show, come on now.
But But they do give you, with the hex edges, they give you some rulings for things called stunts that your pilots can do. So you got your back off, you got your barrel roll, which looks like a proper barrel roll, not an aileron roll. Game theory. You got your evade, flip and burn. That's interesting. It's a half speed and 180 turn at the end. Oh, so okay. A flyby, a slide, flying arcs, stuff like that. They actually incorporate flying arcs, so you can go over something if you need to, I guess. So it's pretty good. I like
think it's also referring to
going so far.
I think it's also referring to turning arcs as well, in the sense that depending on, and again, it depends on your understanding of space travel and the understanding that they're going to allow you to use of space travel. Because I'm going to cite Babylon 5 as being one of the best for the idea of, sure, cut the engines and you go the other way if you put your thrusters on that way. Like, because there's no friction, because there's no anything, as soon as you get that extra movement, you're able to turn.
Yeah. So we'll see how much that incorporates in. But I'm liking it so far. I think that it'll be interesting. And I think that as far as balancing starships, balancing for the group and having to face them, it talks about in there, don't shoot at a starship with your regular weapons. It just doesn't work. They're like, it just doesn't work. Don't do that. You will get shot by the starship. It will blow you up. So
I'm aiming for its thruster.
okay, your kinetic bullet melts before it even gets into the thruster.
It's pretty funny. In Rogue Trader, you have like a starship could do a d6 damage with a weapon. Doesn't sound like a lot, but that d6, 1 point of damage is equal to around 1,000 casualties.
So there you go. This does not seem as complicated as the Rogue one, but I think it's that way on purpose. I think that they're trying to make it accessible for people to get into. Anyway, let's move on to spells. My opinion on spells is they're pretty good. There are some good spells and there are some stinkers, just like there are good feats and bad feats. But overall, I think they did a fair job with the spells. They still hold the theme. They shift up some names, but they also give it a different flair, and they make it work within the mechanics. So in the same way that they transported over the feats well, I think they transported over the spells well, and even just made up new spells because the others didn't fit. What's everyone else's kind of ideas about those?
In a lot of ways, I see a lot of the spells as very similar to what they have in Pathfinder already. So a lot of the functionality we're going to already kind of understand to a certain point. But they really have done a good job, from what I can see, of making them making the new ones fit in well. Like the idea of kinetic barrier, reflecting armor, and things along those lines. Like I like this hurl force disc. You could be Captain America.
Yeah, you could be a
like
Captain
there's some
America.
really cool things out here.
I like them too. The thematics seem very appropriate.
I'm actually looking at how many things I can bounce this force disc off of right now.
I have to
What about-
say, like the amount of spells on every level is about the same, which is not the case in Pathfinder. Pathfinder, you have like 20 level 1 spells, maybe 12 level 2 spells, maybe 6 level 3 spells, and so on and so forth. It just shrinks with every spell level. But here they keep it fairly even throughout the levels.
And I don't know if this is the case in the actual book, but the SRD, it only goes to 6th level. Is that the top spell level for the game so far? Or in general?
I will look at that right now. But I think... Oops.
Just pulling up the Technomancer to see what's... Yeah, 6th level is the top level spell.
Yep.
Hmm.
All the spells go from 1 to 6.
Yeah.
0 to 6.
Which I think also makes it a little bit interesting from the standpoint of it. It just sort of, I guess, changes the power dynamic in a certain regard. So you're not looking at 0 to 9th level spells any longer. They've kind of condensed that, where gaining an access to your next level spell is almost a bigger deal from that standpoint, right?
Yeah, I would say so. Especially when you go and look at the idea that some of these spells, these higher level spells, like interplanetary transport, that is huge when you're talking about a star game, a space game. That's a 6th level spell, and I believe they say ritual. I think they include rituals in this one, if I'm correct. But that's a big deal to have a spell that can transport you from one planet to another with relatively no time loss.
And see, I'm actually looking at it here. We don't even have that on the SRD right now. So there's got to be stuff that's still on its way.
Yeah. That's a big deal spell. When you can transport from one area to another with a spell. That's massive. That's plane shift, but you know where you're going.
That almost makes you want to do a sort of permanent enchantment on, say, a pad in a room on your spaceship, and have somebody, staff it named Scotty, and you're safe. Or maybe Chief O'Brien instead. But anyways, you know what I'm saying.
Hey, don't lose your Trekkie card.
What's wrong with Scotty? I know never said beam me up, but he did work the transporter on a couple occasions there. But Chief O'Brien now, come on.
Yeah, I'm more willing with Chief O'Brien. Okay, so that's some impressions I've got from the spells. Any other spell impressions that you guys got?
Yeah, one thing I noticed was the cantrips were changed up a little bit. Like a lot of them are pretty much the same thing. Like token spell is basically prestidigitation. Psychokinetic hand is basically mage hand. But one thing I thought was interesting was detect affliction, which is sort of like detect poison, but a little bit more versatile.
Yes. And that speaks to what they're doing with the game style. They expect you to go out and see these new places, these new planets. They expect you to explore. That means you're going to be coming into environments that are nasty. And they talk about this in actually the next section, which is game mastering. And they talk about how, making your adventures and your campaigns and the terrain factors. They give you the basic stuff you would need for wealth and character level and stuff like that. But they also tell you about GM Fiat. They tell you about atmospheres, give you different atmospheric samples like corrosive, no atmosphere, normal, thick, thin, toxic, different biomes. So if you're looking at running a game where they go and look at different planets, which they probably will be in this game, then they give you what you need for it. I'm really quite pleased with how they did that. They do weather effects and stuff like that. Maybe it's constantly storming on this one planet. Who knows? Maybe it's like the planet that they fall onto in Pitch Black. Maybe it's half this and half that. You got to deal with the heat, and then you got to deal with the cold, and so on and so forth.
Well, the other thing I was kind of nice is that any spellcaster no longer has to deal 1d3 damage. For their cantrips, it's now 1d6.
There you go. They did do that in there. They did do that in there.
I must say though, you have way less spell slots
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
in Starfinder. So I hope that the spellcasting classes have something, like if they can compete martially, because they can't just rely on their spells.
Well, from what I've seen, they still get proficiency in small arms, and small arms applies to the category of small arms. It doesn't apply to just simple weapons was a large category that had some nice things to just keep in your pocket. Small arms could be something like a 45, could be technically a small arm. That's a kinetic weapon that's going to do some damage.
Hmm.
All right, but it's a small arm, so they could keep those on them and have accessibility to those as they need them. I think that's going to make a big difference for the combat effectiveness of say that spellcaster runs out of spells before the day's up and they get into an encounter. Well, now he can still use his gun. And some feat choices will help that out too. I think it'll be fairly good, but we'll have to see in practice. It was in the GM section. Here it is. That's the goblin.
That's awesome.
And I like that they did the little cord connecting, because that's so 1940s, 1950s Starman style stuff. So you can tell that they're mixing in a bunch of different genres of sci-fi while still making it fun and hilarious. And so that's the Paizo Goblin for that. I liked that. All right, we're getting to the last bits. We're up to settings and then Pathfinder Legacy. So in the setting, we are not going to review the whole setting and tell you everything that happened. There's a big old timeline in the book and stuff like that. But overall, I will say that I'm fairly satisfied with how they have worked out their setting. In the setting, they even give you stuff like they did in the Pathfinder core rulebook. They tell you what they call the days. Monday is called first day. So the first day of the week for them is Monday, not Sunday. So that would be like that's something to consider when you're looking at your game. They still hold the same months as they did on Golarion. They give you a picture of the solar system, not just here, but on the covers. And that's important for if you're going to be playing in a game. They even give you information on the sun, because there's a way to get close to it. You can see the cities right there in the sun area. It's like that's great. So you've got like 9 different planets, 8 planets and a space station, I think, because in this, Absalom Station has taken the place of Golarion. That's all that's left there. For some reason, that's all that's left. It's only about 5 miles in diameter. It's a big space station for what it is, but it's not very big when you consider a planet. So it can get when you're putting things into the game there. Maybe it's more claustrophobic there. And those are things to think about. They got the Akaton, which is like the battlefield planet. Verces. Idara is a actual the Lashunta have a lot of sway there. If I remember right, it's the Lashunta. No, it's the Kasatha. So there's lots of different ones. I like especially this one, Diaspora. Diaspora. The Diaspora, the Lost Ones, where it's talking about this band here. Because there could be little outposts on each of those different asteroids that you throw in there. They've got Eox. they've got Triaxis, they've got Levara, they've got Brethnia, so on, so forth. And for someone who had to look at the lore when he was doing videos for the Pathfinder deities, the importance of the Wanderer and the Stranger in Actern and Apostate, the importance of those planets in the solar system was a big deal. And they give you the size of them. They don't just give you the size of them, they tell you their atmosphere, their location, their gravity, their days, how long their days are, and how long their years are. I mean, and they give you other ones in here. So, I mean, they give you plenty to work with as far as the setting goes. Let me see. Still give you information about the Great Beyond. And apparently they take the cue kind of from Greg's Magi setting, where it's corporations that do a lot of the controlling, not necessarily governments, because they have factions and corporations like Abadar Corp. Very original, Abadar. Very original. The Android Abolitionist Front, Augmented, Free Captains, the Hell Knights are still a thing. So, yeah. Knights of Golarion, Starfinder Society still exists. Stewards, Xenowardens, etc., etc. So before we jump into the gods that are left over, do you guys have any kind of opinions or thoughts on this new setting that they've got working in?
Well, again, for me, it's very much looks at the future of things, and with my Magi one, I very much think that the way things are going, corporations are going to be more in charge of than anything else. Or again, the show Dark Matter was basically corporations ran shit. Didn't matter what you did, they ran it all, which I find very intriguing because you can get a lot of dynamics, warring companies, not even just warring factions or countries or governments, but the aspect of, well, these two companies are trying to get this resource, therefore you're being sent in now to, cause trouble or something like that. There's a lot of possibilities with this, and I think it's going to be a really interesting setting to play within.
Yeah, things can get gray really quick. What are you, Colin?
When I was at MegaCon, I was beginning to tell you guys, but I wanted to save this for this little section. They were telling me that in the Starfinder setting, basically in this galaxy where there had been intergalactic communication, and I think it goes beyond the solar system. Correct me if I'm wrong.
It does through magic.
Yeah. There's basically this giant hole in the center of it, and the galaxy is basically turned into a donut. And they cannot get communications through this hole in the center of the galaxy. And it's not just like a black hole, but it's like emptiness. There's nothing there. It's this big old ring. So I thought that was a very interesting way of doing it. And another thing they mentioned is that when this happened, everyone sort of wakes up and they have no idea what's happened. They have no idea what they've been doing in the past. And there's sort of this amnesia to it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That is, I think, what they call... Let me get that in here correctly. Where's the timeline? I just had the timeline. Oh, the gap. They call that the gap. When all that happened and Golarion disappeared and all that was like whoosh.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting way. It keeps it ambiguous.
Yeah, I think it would give a GM a lot to play with if you're trying to uncover history.
Yeah. I think that's a way to do it. If you're going to play in the Golarion setting, I think it's giving you a good way to play in it. Alex, do you have any kind of opinions on the Golarion, the new setting of the Pact Worlds and stuff?
I don't know a whole lot about it, but I just hope it's large enough, but also small enough to play in. Because it could easily get out of hand if it's too big, and
Right.
yeah, I just hope that it's the perfect size, and that you have like planets and stations close enough to each other that there's like a what you would consider like a low level place to be, and then there's the far away stations or planets and such that you could visit that's kind of like less inhabited and explored. It would be more dangerous generally.
Yeah. So they talk about that. I think that the lower level areas really are the areas on the planets that you see in the Pact Worlds. Probably Absalom Station or something like that is going to be the most low level of the areas. It's only 5 miles in diameter, and it's going to be cramped. So it's probably the lowest level as far as that goes. But I think that they talk about going into the vast, which is what they call space. And they give you the rules that you need as a GM to say, hey, this is the planet you guys ended up on. You found it here, or you're going to this corporate Abadar Corp wants you to check out this place here for possible mining resources. I mean, you could do a whole nuclei campaign with an EVE Online type setting twist to it, where you're part of this corporation or you're starting up this group and you want to do this and get this resource so you can sell it to the highest bidder, whether that's Abadar Corp or the Abolitionist Front or whoever. So, I mean, you got a lot of options. You got a lot of you got the vast to journey into, so, or to stay close. So, yeah. So let's talk about faith and religions, because we've got a few, and apparently the gods still exist in Pathfinder. I mean, in Starfinder, which is somewhat unique when you go and consider what usually happens when you get into science fantasy. A lot of the times the gods are kind of left by the wayside. So I think it's neat that they kept that idea that there are still gods. There is still deific power in some way, form, or fashion. And it's still unclear whether it's deific power or the power of something else that caused that to happen to the galaxy. So, but the gods that are left are Hylax, Iomade, Sarenrae, Iresa, Desna, Waden, Abadar, Televet, Eloritu, Ibra, Pharasma, of course, Triune, which is, we'll talk about in just a minute, Besmara, Oris, Demoritosh, Zon-Kuthon, which is important to note, Lao Shu Po, Urgathoa, the Devourer, and Nyarlathotep. Like, legit, they say is God in this setting. So, okay. Let's start with some opinion. No Asmodeus. And I'm sure that there's still other gods, that those other gods still exist.
Right.
But these are the main gods they got in there. And it is surprising because Asmodeus is highly tied to the Hell Knights. So he still got to exist. He still probably exists. Or some other creature ascended to his place. But I was surprised. What do you guys think of these gods? Have you got a chance to look at them, or what impressions are you getting?
Well, my first question, and maybe you'd be able to answer this because you have the book in front of you, but Desna normally made her home like in the physical plane, specifically, I believe in the moon or in the stars.
She's more associated with stars than the moon.
Okay, so more of the stars than the moon. Then that sort of self answers my question. I was going to
Yeah.
say, if the moon was destroyed with Galorian, you know, what happened to her?
Right. So yeah, Desna sticks around. There are some that stick around.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. I'm surprised Abadar stuck around, but I guess it makes sense that he's the god of civilization, commerce, law, and wealth. So it makes sense. But Iomade, Sarenrae, Desna, Abadar, Pharasma, Besmara, Zon-Kuthon, Urgathoa, Lao Shao-Pu, and that's it. Those are the only gods of all those that I listed. Those are the only deities that are the same.
Sorry, go ahead.
Those are the only deities that are the same from Pathfinder.
Hmm.
That's it. All these other deities are new. Or
I was just going to bring up that Iomade has a new name.
Iomade. Let's look.
She is now the spirit of Galarian.
Oh ho ho! So she's no longer.
That's going to be interesting to play into this, because she's no longer just the inheritor or the light of the sword. She's now the spirit of Galarian, which I think likely plays into the gap from the standpoint of what would have caused the gap, why she would be considered, the spirit of Galarian, and who were they fighting?
What if she took Galarian within herself to protect it from what happened with the gap?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that would be good. That would be good. So Galarian still exists within this deity, and if the deity dies, so does Galarian. But if the deity survives and the gap is restored, does Galarian return? Don't know.
There's some really cool stuff going on here, but I was just browsing through, and I noticed that the name is now Spirit of Galarian. Okay, then.
Yeah, I like that.
That's going to be an interesting one, because Sarenrae is still known as the Dawnflower. Mm-hmm. You still got Pharasma, Lady of Graves. You still have everybody who's got the same names, essentially. Except Triune, the all code.
Right. I'll get to that in a second. So Abadar, I'm pretty satisfied with him being there. Besmara, Besmara makes sense that she would actually survive. She's the pirate queen.
Yeah,
and I didn't think about her at first.
Space pirates, come on.
Space pirates peddling the spice.
The spice expands consciousness.
That's right. If you want a Dune game, this is actually a fairly good system to do it in, because you get that magic whoosh thing going on. But you got Domaritosh, the god of Akaton and stuff like that, and the Veshkarim. So it's really good to have that for them. Let me see. Desna, Song of the Spheres, makes sense that she's there. She's heavily associated with the spheres, especially when she was fighting this creature that was the god of the deity of plague and disease.
Glonder.
Yeah. I knew it was a GL. Glonder. And she probably vanquished him if she's still around, or at least ran him off. There's the Devourer, which is
you can't kill mosquitoes, though.
Yeah, just ask One Punch Man.
Yeah.
The Devourer, the Star Eater, that's pretty standard, I think, for a god of black holes and stuff for a star campaign. The Iluritu, History, Magic, and Secrets, talks about the hidden truth. You got another one, the Hylax, the Forever Queen, which we know who she goes to. Ibra, the Inscrutable, is new, and I haven't read much about her to know for sure what's up with her or it. Him, excuse me. It says God, not goddess. Ayomade, also very happy about that. Lao Shupu, she is the rat, grandmother rat, very fitting for them to serve her. I don't like Nyarlathotep's subtitle. Nyarlathotep, the Crawling Chaos. I've never really associated Nyarlathotep with the Crawling Chaos because the Crawling Chaos has always been associated for me with Shoggoths. So, whatever. They can do that if they want. But I do think it's cool that they put him in here directly as a god that is commonly worshipped. Because Nyarlathotep is one of the deities in the Lovecraftian universe that is more inclined to deal with mortals than someone like, I don't know, Asathoth. He just sleeps and consumes. There's Horus, the Agent of Change, Pharasma, Sarenrae. Pharasma would of course stay around because there's always death. The Triune. There's Talavet and then the Triune. The All Code. When I first heard that I was reading through the front part of the book about this, what was going on. And I was like, this Triune thing, it says it's made up of 3 gods. I bet that it's Bry is one of them. And I went back here. I was like, I'll be patient. I won't go cheat and look. And then I got back to this area and I'm like, yep. They found Bry and they combined themselves into the Triune, the All Code. And I'm like, all right. That shows me that they're trying to keep their consistency in their stuff. So I liked it. I liked that was a thing. So we have Urgathoa. After that, Waydan, Uresa, and Zon-Kuthon was another one I wanted to point out and highlight. Because Zon-Kuthon and his whole story, he was the brother of Shaylin, the goddess of beauty and love, and they kind of shared a pantheon. And he went off one time and went out into the great beyond, I think they called it then, and he came back not as her brother who had a B name before that, Bray or something like that.
Dubrawl.
He came back. Dubrawl, yes. And he came back as Zon-Kuthon. So that whole corruption there, that whole changing, that whole thing that made him look basically like a Cenobite, that whole thing was really fascinating. And I'm really interested to see how much that will play into the new setting. If there is a thing out there like a Cenobite-esque thing that is pushing its way into the Pact Worlds or closer to them, if he's got a bigger upfront presence. So
I'm just looking at the Starfinder wiki, and it's actually bringing up Shaylin as whereabouts unknown and guidance to former followers being inconsistent within the Starfinder universe.
Yeah. Now that's the wiki, but yes, and that I think is going to be a big deal. What about all those followers of who was it? Gozra, the god of nature. I mean, there's still nature planets, right? Are those druidic styled people now lost even when they go to a nature planet, or is his presence more potent on the nature planet? Do they stay closer to it? You know, all those different aspects, because they list some other gods in here, Asmodeus being one of them. But ooh, they got a black butterfly. You see the antithesis of Desna?
1-800 Druidia.
Well, I mean, there is no druid class, so maybe industrialization is taking place over nature.
I don't know. But the druids would be really pissed off about that. I mean, they would want to balance that stuff out, man, like right now.
Mm-hmm.
But, but yeah. And I like fairly well the new Pantheon. So
You were mentioning
what-
some antithesis of Desna with a black butterfly. That sounds pretty interesting.
yeah, it lists right here under other gods, Black Butterfly. The silence between is what she's called. She's a chaotic good, goddess of distance, silence, and peace. Maybe she's just a shadow or an aspect of Desna.
That's interesting.
It says as Desna is goddess of the stars, the black butterfly is goddess of the dark spaces between them. Sometimes called Desna's shadow, the black butterfly despises evil and teaches that in the silences between breaths and thoughts, one can see one's true nature. Ooh, that's really cool. I like that.
I really want to use that god in something, like a character backstory or something. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. They have Eldest as a god, and it's the Lords of the Fae. So apparently, some of the Lords of the Fae have lived long enough to attain godhood.
Hmm.
Or if they, is that something that's always been there?
Or did they all
9
sort of
different-
merge?
Well, no, it says it's a pantheon of 9 different Fae Lords. Green Mother and the Lantern King to Nig, the Hooded,
Hmm.
and Shaika the Many. The eldest rule the first world, which is basically the Fae Wild. So yeah, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I actually am digging. I'm actually liking Starfinder's lore just as much as the Galarian lore, or a bit more perhaps, because I can take a fresher look at this Starfinder lore than I can the Pathfinder lore. So that's my opinion of it. I like what they're doing. What about you guys with this setting stuff? Nothing
I'm
new
really
to say,
liking
nothing
it.
to add.
No, I was waiting to see if anybody else was going to jump in, but I'm really, really liking it. To the point where I really want to start playing, kind of thing, because there's so much awesome stuff that exists about this, and there's so much awesome. There's so much potential for this, and there's so much that we can do with it that just seems really, really interesting. Hell, if it weren't for the fact that we were still in the middle of Rise of the Rune Lords, I would be saying, okay, character creation. When are we doing this?
I know. Well, we got October coming up.
Yeah.
That's an announcement to everybody. We kind of decided that we're going to take a break from Rune Lords in October, just to give me a break from GMing. So that's the thing. Watch for that.
Yeah.
So you may get to see this, Starfinder. But yeah, I'm looking forward to eventually getting to Fiddle Faddle with this. You don't have to buy anything new. You don't have to. I mean, all you got is this. Or if you want to use the online thing, use the online thing. Paizo doesn't much care as long as you use their product.
Yeah.
Or promote their product.
Well, and I was just, to be completely honest, I was looking to see whether or not they had released any adventure paths for this yet or not, and they do have one on Station Absalom, where that's a 1 to 6 right now that they've got going, that they've already released. Actually, it looks really. Again, there's a lot to be excited about this from the standpoint of not only does it have a lot of really cool fantasy-esque setups, but it also lets you explore it from a sci-fi standpoint of, yes, there's a lot of different things. It's not just Pathfinder in space. Now it is Pathfinder in space, but they've also done a lot of really good work, it looks like, to make that fleshed out.
Right. And I agree. I think they really did a near seamless job of mixing the fantasy with the sci-fi and making it mesh. So I like it. That brings us to the very end of the book, where we come to the Pathfinder Legacy. And you guys can't really see this picture, but if you look at the cover of the core rulebook, it is basically that, but all teched up. That is a cyborg red dragon that they're fighting. That's pretty cool, which makes me very interested in their next, in their, and those kobolds look absolutely wicked. But
That
makes me
dragon's
very
metal.
interested.
Literally.
Yeah. But it makes me very interested in what their first bestiary will look like. We'll probably have a lot of that mixing of those classic fantasy things into a technological state. And that sounds really cool. You imagine a red dragon working the underground network of Absalom Station? I mean, yeah, that'd be pretty cool. All right. So, getting into the legacy portion, I like that they did things like put their old characters into teched up stuff. I saw the cleric in here too somewhere. She had a really cool life bubble around her head that she was casting. But in the last bit, they gave you some Pathfinder Legacy stuff where you're able to convert things over. You can take people out of time from Galarian, and they give you conversion rules for it. I'm not sure how well balanced that would be with the system, but you could try it. I'd rather just come into it a bit fresh to start. But they do give you, and this is a thing with the setting right now, is that dwarves and elves and humans and half-elves and gnomes and stuff like that, and halflings, they're not nearly as common as they used to be. Halflings are still fairly common because they're basically just short humans. I mean, pretty much. But things like half-orcs, they've changed the lore a lot. Well, they've changed the lore quite a bit by saying that most half-orcs are going to be basically purebred half-orcs, because orcs don't have as much of a presence anymore. The same with elves and half-elves. Elves still exist, but they're not nearly as common as they used to be. And you can still have a half-elf person, but oftentimes it's because their parents were half-elves. And dwarves just aren't really as common anymore. They're mainly on remembering right. So they got some star citadels attached to a certain asteroid, it says. So there's lots of things like that that make it interesting. So you guys got any opinions on them carrying over some of those some of those races? Kane would probably be like, I don't want space elves. But they're there, just not super common.
I mean, if human survives, why can't dwarves survive, you know?
Yeah. You want your 40K?
Yeah.
Mohawked barbarian.
Well, I'll even go into the point of if what we just sort of stumbled upon and think in terms of, Iomade housing Galarian, it's not that the races necessarily died out, they've just become fewer and further between. So you'd still see them, it's just you'd have to come up with a reason as to where they've been, what they've been doing. Are they, out of time and place? But I do get it in the sense that you don't want space elves or whatever, but at the same time, why not? Could be somebody out of time and place. Could be they've been in hiding because they're hunted. There's lots of really cool ways of pulling it together, right?
Right. I mean, there's ways of doing it. They're just not as common as they used to be. So for those with concerns that those races will overtake the new ones, or that the new ones aren't really as important as they should, as one might think they should be, no, they're still the main races. So whenever some new stuff comes out, those new races are going to be the ones that get favored as far as always getting something when something comes out, because those are the core races. The stuff in the back, They're legacy characters. They're legacy races. They're not core races. So they're going to be in their supplementary.
And as a GM, I'd be more along the lines of, okay, if you want to be this, here are going to be a whole whack of rules, and you got to come up with a really damn good reason you want to play this.
Right.
But
halflings have 2 hit points ratio.
They're not nearly as hardy.
Yeah.
Not nearly.
Humans have
You're gonna be
4,
doing-
so if they're half a human, well, so do the rat folk main race. It only has 2.
Yeah, but the rats.
Exactly. Well,
I mean,
you would think that they would be
big cat folk. Oh, what if you went to? Oh, you could totally do a planet where it was like the Khajiit, and it was nothing but cat folk, but they had different breeds of cat folk, based upon the moons. And they had the big hulking cat folk, and then this little rat folk was there, and he's like,
Yep.
I'm gonna wait in the ship.
Yep. Ooh.
That'd be,
You could literally make Rocket
yeah.
from Guardians of the
Skin it.
Galaxy.
Because I think that's what they were going for. Because that's what I was getting. Make him like a mechanic
Oh yeah.
soldier or something that gives him huge guns and stuff.
Or the grenades, the anti-grav grenades or mines or whatever from the last movie.
And you could totally do that in Starfinder.
Did I
All
miss
right.
it? But are they bringing in other races, or have a conversion for it?
They have conversion, yes. You missed it. That's what you get for walking away.
So
It's in
for like some of
Pathfinder Legacy
the
portion.
like obscure races, like the Kitsune or the other ones out there.
Uh-huh.
That's the
Don't worry, Colin. I know for a fact there's already people working on the Kitsune conversion so that they can make Star Fox the ace pilot operative.
That is awesome.
Fine.
Though, if that's the case, you also need to have Falco. You also need to have
Flippy. So
Well,
you gotta have the
There's
Gripply.
bird races. There's bird races. There's Gripply. You could have a Strix for the bird race. And
please, we need to do a one-shot Star Fox. I'm sorry, that's gonna happen now. You've got your
Just
fighters
reskin
that can morph into tanks or some shit, and
So there you go. There you go. All right.
and literally
already
could do the
working on
barrel
that.
roll.
Yeah.
The literal barrel roll, not the aileron roll. So yeah, they got the whole conversion thing in there for people that want to convert things over without waiting for them to do it. And you can totally do that. And actually having things like the Fey styled races like the Kitsune is not way out there because the eldest still exist. The first world still exists. In fact, the other planes might not be nearly as affected. Now, it is something to point out for people in the setting that when you jump or drift or you hit the star drift or whatever they call it, it starts to tear away at other planes. So when you're going through that drift, anything could come into that drift from other planes. So that is something to think about, something to consider when you're doing your space travel.
That's so 40k.
Yeah.
Let's go into the
All of a
warp
sudden-
where demons live.
All of a sudden, you've got like the demon horse coming after us again.
Yeah. Oh,
no, not again.
recurring villains.
Or literally have the metal red dragon,
There you go.
It's either that or X-Death comes in somewhere.
So you pass some cat folk on the way driving this thing with a big red symbol on the side and a cat head in it that's black. You just kind of pass each other and rubberneck a little bit.
Samurai
They look
Pizza
over
Cat
it.
somewhere.
Yeah, they look over at your all-female crew and go, "Ho!" All right. So, everybody, we hope you enjoyed the our thoughts on this new system. To us, anyway, it would be new to everyone. We'll see how it goes. I like what I've seen so far. Let's give conclusionary thoughts. So, Colin, how are you feeling about the system, having just looked at it, not played it yet, but looked at it, seeing what you think?
You know, I think it looks like a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff that's been sort of 5E'd, but still keeping the spirit of Pathfinder with all the variety going on. So it's been simplified, but it's still also very diverse, is my overall conclusion around it. And I also want to point out that I agree with Greg. We do need to have a Star Fox one-shot going on at some point. Because that's so
if people are
nostalgic.
volunteering to run it, I'll probably play in it. All right.
But that's it.
What about you, Greg? What are your impressions of the system? Quick 5-second, whatever, 30 seconds.
Do we need to finish Rise of the Ruin Lords? I mean, no, I really like it. I think this is going to be a lot of fun when we get into it because as long as we all agree to do it, it looks like a great system to play in.
All right. Alex, what you thinking?
Yeah, I think we need to cut more shortcuts in Rise of the Ruin Lords, definitely. Get speed this up a little bit.
Okay, so we're going to go for the wipe. We're just going to charge the last guy, right?
This next one, you're just going to go, where's the biggest baddie in town?
I don't know how Paizo is going to release their stuff, but I think that you could probably start the game a bit, but like without a bestiary, that's kind of crucial, I think, to build your own adventure. You could, of course, play the adventure path, the first part that they released, but after that, I'm not sure how much you can do on your own. So I hope that they come out with a bestiary soon, definitely.
Right. And I would have to echo you guys too. I like it. I think it's going to be good. I agree that they need a bestiary fairly quickly. They may be waiting for this first adventure path to come out. I don't think it's a good idea for them to wait too terribly long because the system does look wonderful. The system looks very clean. It does not look very junked up. It looks fairly simple to get into, simple to play with, and the fun build your own starship mini game is just kind of that. It's not something you have to do. It is a fun thing that you can do. And you can make something a lot more powerful than just your stock travel ship that you'll get stuck with if you work for the corporations. So it's going to be a lot of fun for people that like that do those longer campaigns where you actually play through a system and say, okay, this is our goal, we're going to do this and stuff like that. I think it actually lends itself well to longer campaigns because you have the investment in the starship. You have the idea of, oh, it's easier to play this because I'm the same character, but even on that starship, you build a big starship, say you populate it with your own PCs, and you say, okay, I'm going to play this PC today because I'm on the starship. In the same way we did the guild campaign, where in this guild, oh, I'm going to play this guy because he's in this guild. Well, I'm going to play this guy because he's in this starship, which is something that we'll probably end up doing. We'll probably play in the Galarian system for a while if I have a run, and we'll have a starship, or we'll be on a starship, and you guys will start that starship off. and then we'll go a few years in the future, and maybe we'll have a few crew members, or you may build that up over the campaign and be able to flesh it out more. So I'm liking it. I think it's good. And as soon as they get that bestiary out, or give us some kind of bestiary, even a small one to piddle paddle with, would be nice. Because I am not going to build an entire city of NPCs for you guys to fight and fuss with. Sorry. It's not going to happen. But I like it. So those are our thoughts. Is there anything you guys would like to say to the travelers before they head out?
Do a barrel roll.
Do a barrel roll. Appropriate. Appropriate.
Aim to mischief.
Well, you can aim
Sorry,
to misbehave.
aim to misbehave. I apologize.
Yeah, shows you ain't no real brown coat.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, you can play lots of different types of games. I encourage people to, if they want some inspiration, watch Outlaw Star, Cowboy Bebop. Outlaw Star, Cowboy Bebop. Don't watch Star Wars, really. I mean, you can. But if you want to feel what this game's going to be like, watch those two. Watch Farscape would be a good one. You could even, to a point, watch Stargate and get some good feelings of what this is meant to be like. This is not meant to be necessarily space wizards. This is meant to be more of a... These are personal... There are space wizards, but this is meant to be more of a personal group type story, not necessarily all that crazy stuff that goes on, that tends to go on in those big epic stories. You can have a lot of these smaller, more personal stories, I'm thinking.
I'd also recommend, as I said earlier in the stream, Dark Matter is a very good indicator of this one. It's got 3 seasons, or will have 3 seasons, but very much of the ragtag crew, starship, going all around, corporations. Should be fun.
Should be fun. All right. So if you liked the video, or if you didn't like the video, leave us a comment down below. Thumbs up or thumbs down, it's your choice. You can like, share, and subscribe if you like. You can find us on our website, which is the endofplanarcrossroads.com. You can find us on YouTube or Facebook by the same name. You can find us on Twitch at the IOPC, and you can find us on Twitter at the IOPC. So we have all those things going on for us. Hopefully you'll be able to keep with us. As always, have a great day. God bless and enjoy, and we'll see you next time, travelers. Goodbye.
Bye.